The morning Margaret Whitmore decided to teach me about property compliance was the morning she accidentally turned my ranch into a $2.3 million water park, with herself as the star attraction. Picture this, 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm sipping coffee, watching the sunrise paint Texas gold, when I hear a noise that sounds like a freight train having a meltdown with Niagara Falls. I step outside and there's our beloved HOA president, standing next to her gleaming excavator like some twisted groundbreaking ceremony. Except instead of ribbon cutting, she's watching a 30-foot geyser of county water baptize my front yard. Her designer blazer, the one she wore to intimidate homeowners, is now modern art, splattered head to toe in Texas mud. Her perfectly applied mascara is streaking dramatically down both cheeks. The smell of diesel fuel, wet earth, and pure panic hangs thick as her pride. See, Margaret thought she was digging a spite well to secure HOA water access. Instead, she severed the main line feeding 17,000 residents. That little power trip exposed corruption that ended her forever. Ever dealt with an HOA Karen who bit off more than she could chew? This story is for you. My name's Jake Thompson, and 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem would be whether to paint my barn red or leave it weathered gray for the Instagram tourists who kept stopping to photograph authentic Texas. Shows you how much I knew about suburban warfare. After 20 years debugging other people's code disasters and developing an unhealthy addiction to solving impossible problems, I'd finally cashed out and moved back to my grandfather's 47-acre slice of heaven. The plan was gloriously simple: work remotely from the front porch, maybe convince a few photogenic cows to pay rent by existing beautifully, and rediscover what silence sounds like without Zoom meetings. The morning air here tastes like cedar and possibility. Metal logs provide the soundtrack instead of sirens, and gravel crunches under my boots like nature's stress relief therapy. I'd found paradise, a 1950s farmhouse that creaked in all the right places, and a barn that had outlasted 3 generations of Thompsons. For exactly 93 days, life was perfect. Then Margaret Whitmore moved in next door and decided my paradise needed management. Willow Creek estates sprouted along my eastern fence like expensive mushrooms after rain. McMansions so big they had their own weather systems, complete with an HOA regulating everything from mailbox fonts to acceptable shades of beige. But Margaret didn't just move into the biggest house, she declared herself its empress and immediately began expanding her empire. Our first encounter felt like a software crash in real time. Picture a woman whose power suits were pressed so crisp they could cut glass, with blonde hair pulled back tight enough to serve as a medieval torture device. She materialized at my door, carrying a leather portfolio thick enough to stop bullets, introducing herself as President Whitmore, not Margaret, but President, as if she'd been democratically elected to rule my Tuesday morning coffee ritual. "Your fence is 6 inches too close to our boundary," she announced, consulting papers with the gravity of nuclear launch codes. "And that vehicle violates our commercial restrictions," she added, gesturing at my F-150 like it was actively leaking radiation. I explained with the infinite patience I'd developed from explaining recursion to marketing executives that my fence had minded its own business since 1987, and my truck was parked on my property. The smell of her expensive perfume mixed with morning dew in an oddly threatening way, like roses at a funeral. Margaret's smile could have frozen hellfire. "Property boundaries aren't always clear-cut, Mr. Thompson. I'll be in touch." That promise launched 3 months of escalating administrative terrorism. The first complaints came over my unauthorized structures, my grandfather's barn, which predated her subdivision by 40 years. Then reports of my truck being abandoned, even while I was literally driving it to buy groceries. Finally, she convinced the Postal Service that my mailbox violated regulations that existed only in her fevered imagination. Each assault meant hours on hold with county officers, driving to government buildings that smelled like desperation and industrial-strength coffee, proving I wasn't violating anything except Margaret's pathological need to control every blade of grass within a 5-mile radius. The county clerk began greeting me with, "Jake Thompson for Margaret Whitmore duty again." Like I was a regular at the world's most bureaucratic bar. But Margaret's masterpiece came 2 weeks ago, when she announced the HOA was investigating water rights inconsistencies. She'd hired a surveyor with homeowners' money to find any excuse claiming my land belonged to her suburban kingdom. The woman had done her homework with terrifying thoroughness. She discovered a 1952 survey discrepancy from when my grandpa bought the place. Nothing affecting actual boundaries, but enough gray area to file lawsuits until I either bankrupted myself or surrendered my peace treaty with reality. The water rights angle was diabolical genius wrapped in bureaucratic legitimacy. Prove HOA water access across my property, force an easement fight. Game over. Margaret Whitmore had declared war on my retirement dream. Too bad for her. This old code monkey had spent decades solving problems far more complex than a power-drunk HOA president with delusions of municipal grandeur. I had no idea that sometimes the best debugging strategy is letting the system crash spectacularly. The smell of diesel fuel and pure panic would soon teach her that lesson the most expensive way possible. 2 days after Margaret's water rights announcement, I woke to the romantic sound of diesel engines serenading my bedroom window at precisely 6:30 a.m. Nothing says good morning like heavy machinery, am I right? I stumbled to the front porch in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, expecting county workers fixing a pothole. Instead, I found Margaret conducting what looked like a corporate hostile takeover of my front yard. She stood beside a massive surveying truck, clipboard clutched like a battle plan, directing 2 bewildered men with equipment toward my fence line. The woman was dressed for a board meeting, not tramping through Texas dirt at dawn, because apparently property theft requires business attire. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," she chirped, with the fake cheerfulness of a used car salesman. "Just conducting our HOA boundary verification. Nothing to concern yourself with." The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with her overpowering perfume created an olfactory assault that made my head spin, or maybe that was just the sheer audacity. "That's my property you're surveying, Margaret. President Whitmore, please." She consulted her clipboard with the theatrical precision of someone announcing lottery numbers. "Actually, the survey will determine exactly whose property this is. According to our research, there may be some discrepancies in your grandfather's original deed. One surveyor was already setting up equipment 20 feet inside my fence line, treating my land like it was Central Park. The other was photographing everything: my barn, my house, even my truck in the driveway. The metallic click, click of his camera sounded like a countdown timer to my financial doom. "You can't just waltz onto my property without permission," I said, gripping my coffee mug hard enough to leave fingerprints in the ceramic. Margaret's smile could have cut diamond. "Mr. Thompson, if this area falls within HOA common space, which our preliminary research suggested might, then we absolutely can. I'd hate for you to interfere with a legitimate property survey. Here's where 2 decades of debugging experience kicked in. When your system crashes, you don't panic. You document everything and find the root cause." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Just documenting this legitimate survey for my records, President Whitmore." Margaret's practiced smile flickered like a dying light bulb. "That's unnecessary," she said. "Oh, but thoroughness is so important in property matters," I said, channeling her own condescending tone back at her like a boomerang. "I'm sure the county would love to see how professional HOA surveys operate these days." What Margaret didn't know was that I'd spent the previous evening researching Texas property law instead of binge-watching Netflix like a normal retiree. Knowledge nugget: in Texas, property surveys on disputed land require written notice to all affected parties 72 hours in advance, and trespass laws still apply during preliminary research. The takeaway: Margaret's surprise survey was about as legal as a $3 bill printed on toilet paper. "Gentlemen," I called to the surveyors loud enough for my phone to catch every word, "I'm going to need to see your permits and the written notice that should have been delivered to me 3 days ago." The lead surveyor's face went blank as if the Windows blue screen of death had invaded reality. "What written notice?" the lady asked. This was all approved. Margaret's complexion cycled through several interesting colors before settling on a shade that perfectly matched my barn's faded red paint. The scent of a desperation was almost as strong as her perfume. "Now, Mr. Thompson, you're being deliberately obstructionist." "I'm being deliberately legal," I replied, still recording, as the surveyors began packing their equipment with the efficiency of professionals who'd been burned by amateur hour before. "Something you might want to try sometime." The sound of metal cases snapping shut was better than Christmas morning. "This isn't over, Margaret hissed, her voice tight as piano wire about to snap. No, I agreed, watching her storm back toward her McMansion, designer heels clicking against asphalt like an angry woodpecker. I don't think it is. As I watched her retreat, shoulders rigid with wounded pride, clipboard clutched like a security blanket, I realized Margaret had just handed me a gift wrapped in incompetence. She'd shown me she was willing to break the law to get what she wanted. More importantly, she'd assumed I was just another pushover retiree who'd fold at the first sign of official-looking paperwork. Margaret Whitmore was about to learn that assumption was her first mistake. And in my experience debugging complex systems, when someone makes their first critical error, they're usually already coding their second. The smell of diesel was fading, but the aroma of Margaret's desperation was just getting started. Her revenge arrived exactly 1 week later, hand-delivered by a county inspector who looked like he'd rather be investigating actual crimes than whatever fresh hell had landed on his desk. Mr. Thompson, he consulted his clipboard with all the enthusiasm of someone reading his own death warrant. I'm here about the violation. I was under my truck's hood, elbow-deep in spark plug therapy, when this bureaucratic meteor struck my perfectly peaceful Tuesday. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee from my porch mug was about to be replaced by the stench of Margaret's latest masterpiece. Violations? I asked. Well, sir, Dave, his name tag looked as tired as his expression, squinted at his paperwork like it was written in ancient Sumerian. Unauthorized livestock operations, improper waste disposal, and running a commercial vehicle repair business without permits. He gestured at my truck like it might explode. Multiple complaints, with photographic evidence. I straightened up, wiping greasy hands on my shop rag. Margaret had weaponized bureaucracy with the precision of a Swiss clockmaker, turning my weekend truck maintenance into an environmental crime scene. Dave, this is my personal truck. I'm changing spark plugs, not running a chop shop. And what livestock? Do you see any cows? Dave surveyed my completely cattle-free property, then made a note that looked suspiciously like complainant, possibly delusional. Protocol says I have to complete the inspection, sir. He trailed off diplomatically. Knowledge nugget. Texas county inspectors are legally required to investigate all formal complaints within 48 hours, but they can also flag serial harassers and protect future targets. The takeaway: piss off enough inspectors with bogus complaints, and the system starts protecting your victims instead of enabling the crazy. Tell you what, Dave. Let's do this inspection properly, document everything, and create a paper trail for when this inevitably escalates into something requiring lawyers. Dave's relief was visible as sweat stains spreading across his shirt. That'd be great, sir. We spent 20 minutes touring my property with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigation. Dave documented my obviously personal truck, my complete lack of livestock, and my environmentally pristine land while his pen scratched across forms like an angry cricket. Each note was another nail in Margaret's credibility coffin. One more thing, I said, pulling out my phone as we finished. You might want to see when these photos were taken. I can prove this truck hasn't moved in 3 days. I showed him the security camera footage, timestamped video of Margaret trespassing yesterday at 4 p.m., photographing my truck like she was preparing evidence for the International Criminal Court. The sound of Dave's pen intensified to machine gun levels. She was on your property without permission, he said. His eyebrows practically launched into orbit. Unless she's got a telephoto lens that can see through my barn. The smell of Margaret's desperation was getting stronger. Apparently strong enough to reach the county offices. Dave closed his clipboard with the finality of a judge's gavel. Mr. Thompson, I'm filing this as no violations found, with a harassment notation. You might want to consider a counter-complaint. After Dave left, I sat on my porch steps, listening to the birds and processing Margaret's latest strategic blunder. She'd escalated from illegal surveys to filing false reports, burning through her credibility faster than a meth lab explosion. My phone buzzed. Your little games won't work forever. Some problems require permanent solutions. A concerned neighbor. I screenshot the message and added it to my growing file labeled Margaret's Greatest Hits. The woman was documenting her own harassment campaign with the dedication of someone building their own prosecution case. Margaret Whitmore was learning that when you escalate conflicts with someone who thinks like a programmer Every move gets logged, analyzed, and stored for future reference. And my database was getting very interesting. Margaret's third assault came disguised as community concern, delivered through the Willow Creek Estates newsletter that somehow found its way into every mailbox within a 3-mile radius. The headline read, "Environmental harm threatens our children's safety," with a subtitle that made my coffee taste like battery acid. Local property owner refuses compliance with basic safety standards. I found the newsletter pinned to my front door like a medieval declaration of war, complete with what appeared to be professionally staged photographs of my property taken with a telephoto lens. Margaret had turned me into the neighborhood boogeyman, complete with dramatic lighting that made my perfectly normal barn look like a meth lab straight out of a Netflix crime drama. The article was a masterpiece of creative journalism. According to President Whitmore's extensive research, my property posed significant environmental risks to groundwater safety, and my refusal to cooperate with community safety inspections demonstrated a concerning disregard for neighborhood children's welfare. The smell of fresh newsprint mixed with my mounting rage created an olfactory cocktail that should have come with a warning label. But Margaret's masterstroke was the call to action, a community safety meeting scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. in the Willow Creek Clubhouse, where concerned residents could voice their legitimate safety concerns about my non-compliant property. She was organizing a lynch mob with Robert's Rules of Order. I was still processing this literary assassination when my phone rang. The caller ID showed, County Health Department. "Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah from Environmental Health. We've received some very serious allegations about groundwater contamination on your property. I'm afraid we'll need to schedule an emergency inspection." The sound of my world tilting on its axis was surprisingly quiet. "What kind of allegations?" I asked. "Well, sir, someone has filed a formal complaint claiming you're operating an unlicensed septic system and potentially contaminating the local aquifer. They've provided soil samples and photographs suggesting significant environmental damage." Margaret had gone nuclear. She had escalated from harassment to potentially criminal accusations that could cost me my property, my savings, and possibly my freedom, if she'd somehow manufactured evidence of environmental crimes I didn't commit. I'm connected to the municipal source system. I don't have a septic system, licensed or otherwise. Sir, the complaint includes GPS coordinates and soil analysis showing elevated nitrate levels consistent with septic leakage. I'm required to investigate within 24 hours. Knowledge nugget. In Texas, false environmental complaints can trigger automatic property liens and mandatory remediation costs that attach to your deed before any investigation proves wrongdoing, meaning you pay first, get vindicated later. Environmental accusations are the nuclear option of property warfare because they assume guilt until you prove innocence. "I understand you have to investigate," I said, my programmer brain shifting into crisis management mode, "but I'm going to need everything documented, the original complaint, the soil samples, and whoever provided them. This appears to be part of an ongoing harassment campaign." Sarah's tone shifted slightly. "Harassment campaign? This is the 4th false complaint filed against my property in 2 weeks by the same neighbor. I have documentation of trespassing, frivolous code violations, and now apparent evidence tampering. I'd like to request that your investigation include verifying the authenticity of any samples provided." The sound of typing filled the silence. "Mr. Thompson, can you email me your documentation? If this is harassment, we take that very seriously. False environmental reports waste taxpayer resources and can constitute criminal filing of false reports." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at Margaret's newsletter while the taste of copper pennies filled my mouth, the flavor of fear mixed with fury. She'd crossed the line from annoying neighbor to someone actively trying to destroy my life. But Margaret had made a critical error in her environmental gambit. She'd assumed I wouldn't know how to fight back against technical accusations. She'd forgotten I'd spent 20 years debugging systems far more complex than soil contamination reports. And she definitely hadn't considered that manufacturing evidence against someone with security cameras might leave her own fingerprints all over the crime scene. The smell of her desperation was about to become the stench of her downfall. That night, I did what any self-respecting programmer does when facing a critical system failure. I dug into the code like my life depended on it. Margaret's environmental accusations had lit a fire under my research habits. I spent the evening mapping out every property transaction, HOA filing, and public record I could find about Willow Creek Estates. The smell of reheated pizza mixed with the ozone scent of my overworked laptop as I dove deeper into the digital paper trail than any sane retiree should. The glow from my monitor painted my home office blue, like some kind of detective noir movie where the hero discovers the conspiracy at 2 a.m. What I found made my blood pressure spike and my faith in humanity crater like a meteorite impact. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a sophisticated real estate scam that would make Bernie Madoff take notes. The pieces clicked together like debugging the world's most elegant, malicious code. Margaret's husband, Robert Whitmore, owned Precision Land Surveying, the same company she'd hired for the boundary verification on my property. But that was just the appetizer in this feast of corruption. Diving deeper into county records while my printer hummed like a mechanical bee, I discovered that Precision Land Surveying had conducted emergency surveys on 17 properties bordering Willow Creek Estates over the past 18 months. In every single case, the surveys had discovered boundary discrepancies that required expensive legal resolution, handled exclusively by Margaret's law school roommate, Patricia Vance of Vance & Associates. The pattern was beautiful in its criminal simplicity. Margaret targeted property owners, usually retirees or anyone who couldn't afford prolonged legal battles. She'd manufacture complaints and violations until the owners either sold out or agreed to boundary adjustments that transferred valuable land to the HOA at below-market rates. But here's where it got deliciously criminal. The HOA wasn't keeping that land. They were flipping it to Lonia Development Group, a company owned by Margaret's brother-in-law, Kevin Morrison. The taste of cold pizza and hot revenge mixed on my tongue as I documented this intricate web of fraud. Knowledge nugget. Texas Penal Code Section 32.46 makes it a second-degree felony for public officials to profit from their position without disclosure, punishable by 2 to 20 years in prison and up to $10,000 in fines. The takeaway: Margaret hadn't just been breaking HOA rules, she'd been committing felonies that could land her in an orange jumpsuit for the next 2 decades. The real kicker came when I cross-referenced property values. Margaret's little crime family had netted approximately $2.8 million in illegal land transfers over 18 months. My 47 acres, if successfully stolen through her water rights gambit, would add another $800,000 to her criminal retirement fund. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the night sounds of my soon-to-be targeted property, and felt something shift in my chest, like tectonic plates moving. Margaret hadn't just picked the wrong target. She'd picked someone with the exact skill set needed to unravel her entire operation and gift-wrap it for federal prosecutors. But the absolute best part was yet to come. In her environmental complaint against me, Margaret had made a critical error that would have gotten her fired from any decent software company. She'd claimed the soil samples came from multiple locations across the subject property, complete with GPS coordinates and timestamps. The problem: 2 of those coordinates placed her on my property at times when my security cameras were recording in glorious high definition, and the timestamp on one sample matched footage of Margaret trespassing with a small shovel and sample bags. Like some demented suburban archaeologist, Margaret Whitmore had created a digital confession to evidence tampering, complete with metadata that would make federal prosecutors weep tears of joy. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Project Margaret, Nuclear Option. Then I started organizing 2 years' worth of evidence into a package that would simultaneously destroy her HOA scam, expose her family's fraud operation, and hand the FBI a case so airtight it would make prosecutors fight over who got to put her away. Margaret thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She had no idea I'd been programming her checkmate from the moment she stepped onto my property. The taste of victory mixed with cold pizza had never been so deliciously satisfying. The next morning, I woke with the clarity that comes from having nuclear codes and the wisdom to use them strategically. Margaret's community safety meeting was Thursday, 72 hours to assemble the most satisfying takedown in HOA history, complete with federal authorities, media coverage, and enough evidence to make her lawyer Bill look like the national debt. Time to build my coalition of destruction. First call: Sarah at Environmental Health. Miss Sarah, I've discovered some information about those soil samples that I think you'll find very interesting. The sound of her pen hitting paper told me she was already taking notes. I emailed her the security footage of Margaret planting evidence, complete with timestamps. Her sharp intake of breath when she opened the video was better than Christmas morning. "This is evidence tampering," she said. "I need to involve our criminal investigation unit immediately." I was hoping you'd say that, but there's more. Much more. Second call. Agent Lisa Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Having a neighbor commit federal fraud is like holding a golden ticket to law enforcement attention. Agent Rodriguez, I need to report a multimillion-dollar real estate fraud operation involving HOA corruption and federal disclosure violations. The silence on the line lasted long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. "Are you saying you have documentation of organized fraud?" I have enough documentation to wallpaper the federal courthouse." Third call. Tom Harrison, investigative reporter for the Austin American-Statesman. Tom had spent 15 years covering municipal corruption with bloodhound instincts that made officials break out in cold sweats. "Tom, I've got a story involving HOA fraud, evidence tampering, and enough family corruption to make a Netflix series." "How much money?" "North of $3 million, with security footage of evidence planting." The sound of Tom's keyboard clicking told me everything I needed to know. Knowledge nugget. Under Texas Penal Code Section 37.1, tampering with physical evidence is a third-degree felony punishable by 2 to 10 years in prison. When done to influence a government proceeding, it becomes aggravated perjury with enhanced penalties. Takeaway: Margaret's soil sample shenanigans weren't just civil violations. They were serious felonies that would make her intimately familiar with orange jumpsuits. Fourth call. Marcus Webb, my forensic accounting colleague who'd left software for financial detective work. "Marcus, remember when you said retirement was boring? I've got a corruption case that'll cure that permanently." Within 2 hours, Marcus had agreed to examine the Willow Creek HOA books pro bono, purely for the intellectual challenge of unraveling Margaret's financial shell game. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with righteous indignation as I coordinated Suburban Warfi's most beautiful sting operation. My laptop screen filled with spreadsheets and legal documents that read like a prosecutor's wet dream. Thursday's meeting wasn't going to be Margaret's public execution of my reputation. It was going to be her very public confession to federal crimes, delivered to an audience including FBI agents, environmental investigators, and a reporter already drafting her story. By Wednesday afternoon, my dining room looked like a scene from a crime thriller. Evidence boards covered the walls, connected by red string like a conspiracy theory brought to life. Financial records, photographs, legal documents, and security footage created a web of proof that would make Margaret's defense attorney consider early retirement. The taste of impending justice mixed with afternoon coffee was intoxicating. Margaret had spent months trying to destroy my peaceful retirement. Now I was about to introduce her to a retirement plan that included federal prison and financial ruin. She'd wanted to play hardball with a programmer. She was about to learn that when programmers debug corrupt systems, they don't just fix the problem, they completely rewrite the code. Wednesday morning brought Margaret's final desperate gambit, a perfectly typed legal threat taped to my front door like some suburban declaration of war. The cream-colored envelope was addressed to Mr. Jacob Thompson, property owner, in Margaret's precise handwriting. Inside, letterhead from Vance & Associates made my coffee taste like anxiety and my stomach clench like a programmer facing a critical system failure. Notice of imminent legal action screamed across the top in bold letters visible from space. According to Patricia Vance, Esquire, Margaret's law school roommate and co-conspirator, I had 24 hours to cease harassment activities, remove unauthorized surveillance equipment, and agree to mediation regarding boundary disputes. Failure to comply would result in immediate legal action seeking restraining orders, property liens, and monetary damages exceeding $500,000. The smell of expensive legal paper mixed with morning dew created an olfactory cocktail of intimidation and pure desperation. Margaret was throwing everything at the wall before tomorrow's showdown. But the real kicker was the final paragraph. Recent environmental contamination discoveries may require immediate evacuation and remediation at owner expense. Margaret was threatening to evict me from my own land based on fraudulent soil samples she had planted herself. The woman had brass balls the size of Texas and the strategic thinking of a kamikaze pilot. I was still processing this legal Molotov cocktail when my phone rang. County Sheriff flashed on the caller ID like a neon warning sign. Mr. Thompson, this is Deputy Martinez. We've received a complaint about threatening behavior and possible weapons violations. I need to schedule a welfare check. The sound of my world tilting felt like debugging completely corrupted code. What kind of complaint? I asked. Someone reported threatening statements about neighbors and alleged weapons stockpiling. They claimed to have recordings. Margaret had escalated to filing false police reports with fabricated evidence, burning bridges faster than Sherman marching through Georgia, not realizing she was creating even more evidence of criminal behavior. Knowledge nugget. Under Texas Penal Code Section 37.08, filing a false police report is a Class B misdemeanor, but when it involves allegations of weapons or violence, it can be enhanced to a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in jail and $4,000 in fines. Takeaway: Margaret's desperation was literally stacking potential criminal charges like Jenga blocks. Deputy Martinez, I believe this connects to an ongoing harassment campaign. I have documentation of previous false reports and an active FBI investigation into fraud. The pause on the line felt pregnant with possibility. FBI investigation. Yes, sir. Agent Lisa Rodriguez, Financial Crimes Division. 20 minutes later, Deputy Martinez arrived, radiating the professional skepticism honed by years of suburban warfare. He was tall, methodical, and had the look of someone who'd seen every flavor of neighborhood crazy. Mr. Thompson, I'll be straight. The complainant claimed to have recordings of threats, but said they lost them while being certain about what they heard. The scent of Margaret's desperation apparently reached the sheriff's department. Deputy, she's filed 4 false reports this month. I have security footage of her trespassing and planting evidence for environmental fraud. Deputy Martinez's eyebrows practically launched into orbit. You have footage of evidence planting. Stamped, high-definition video matching the fraudulent soil samples she provided to Environmental Health. His radio crackled with routine traffic while he processed this information. I'm completing this welfare check, documenting your cooperation, and noting potential false reporting. You should file a counter-complaint, he said. After he left, I sat on my porch, listening to the oak trees whisper in the afternoon breeze, marveling at Margaret's spectacular self-destruction. She'd gone from HOA president to criminal defendant in record time, leaving a paper trail that would make prosecutors fight over indictment rights. Margaret's biggest mistake wasn't the fraud or evidence tampering. Her biggest mistake was not realizing that cornered programmers don't panic. They methodically document every error until they can prove the entire system is corrupted. Tomorrow's meeting was going to be her blue screen of death. Thursday morning arrived with crisp autumn air that smelled like victory mixed with poetic justice. Margaret's meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but by 10 a.m., my phone was buzzing like angry bees. The first call came from Kevin Morrison, Margaret's brother-in-law and the final puzzle piece in her corruption network. Mr. Thompson, I understand there's been confusion about property boundaries. Perhaps we could meet before tonight. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer, well above market value. His voice had the oily quality of someone trying to bribe their way out of federal prison. Margaret had sent in the cavalry, but they were as subtle as a brick through a window. That's generous, but I'm not selling, I said. You should reconsider. These disputes can get very complicated, very expensive. It would be unfortunate if tonight's meeting led to lengthy legal battles draining your retirement. There it was, extortion wrapped in politeness, delivered like a mob movie extra. Kevin Morrison had just committed a federal crime over the phone, and I was recording every golden word. Are you suggesting that if I don't sell, tonight's meeting becomes financially damaging? I asked, letting the pause stretch long enough for him to realize he'd stepped into legal quicksand. I'm simply suggesting cooperation benefits everyone, he said. After hanging up, I called Agent Rodriguez to report the bribery attempt. Her keyboard clicking confirmed Kevin had just earned a permanent spot on the FBI's growing defendant list. At 2 p.m., my neighbor Mrs. Patterson called, her voice shaking with genuine fear. Jake, Margaret just left my house with very concerning things about tonight's meeting. She said community votes supporting her safety concerns might trigger automatic property seizures for environmental remediation. She had official-looking papers and wanted me to sign a petition supporting emergency action against your property. Copper filled my mouth as rage mixed with disbelief. Margaret was going door to door with forged documents, trying to build fake community support for stealing my land. Knowledge nugget. Under Texas Penal Code Section 276.013, attempting to influence public proceedings through forged documents constitutes election fraud, punishable by 2 to 20 years in prison. Takeaway: Margaret wasn't just committing felony Jenga blocks anymore, she was stacking a full criminal tower. "Did you sign anything?" I asked. "Heavens, no," she said. The whole thing felt wrong, but Margaret had seemed confident about her legal authority. By 4 p.m., 3 more neighbors reported Margaret's door-to-door fraud campaign. Each call added another layer to her criminal conspiracy. Each forged document added another count that would make prosecutors smile. The smell of afternoon coffee mixed with satisfaction as I watched someone dig their own grave with industrial efficiency. Margaret had spent the day creating enough evidence for multiple federal cases. Her masterpiece came at 5 p.m. when she appeared at my door, flanked by 2 men in cheap suits who'd learned intimidation from bad mafia movers. "Mr. Thompson, I'm offering one final opportunity to resolve this privately." The sound of gravel crunching under their feet, mingled with rustling autumn leaves, created a perfect crime thriller soundtrack. Margaret's perfectly styled hair showed stress fractures. Her usual composure had been replaced by manic, drowning person energy. "Unless you're confessing to federal crimes, we're done talking until tonight. You have no idea who you're dealing with. After tonight, you'll discover some problems have permanent solutions." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Are you threatening me, Margaret?" Panic flickered through her makeup mask. "I'm explaining reality," she said. As they left, I watched Margaret's final transformation, from suburban HOA president to desperate criminal, making overt threats on camera. She'd handed me the last piece of evidence needed for her complete destruction. Tonight wasn't going to be a community safety discussion. It was going to be Margaret Whitmore's public confession to federal crimes, delivered to an audience including FBI agents, environmental investigators, and enough evidence to make her lawyers weep. Margaret had spent the day ensuring her own conviction with the thoroughness of someone checking off a criminal self-destruction checklist. The Willow Creek Clubhouse at 6:45 p.m. looked like a courtroom drama. If courtroom dramas included FBI agents posing as concerned homeowners and environmental investigators with hidden recording equipment, this was it. I arrived carrying a laptop bag containing enough evidence to sink Margaret's criminal empire deeper than the Titanic. The smell of stale coffee and nervous sweat hung in the air as residents filed in, clutching Margaret's forged safety petitions like religious pamphlets. She had transformed the clubhouse into her personal theater of justice, complete with a podium, professional charts about environmental hazards, and a PowerPoint titled "Protecting Our Community, the Thompson Property Crisis." She had even hired a court reporter, apparently believing official documentation would legitimize fraud. Agent Rodriguez sat in the back, posing as a concerned resident while wearing a wire. Sarah from Environmental Health occupied the middle, ready to present evidence-tampering findings. Tom Harrison positioned himself near the front with a camera to document Margaret's public confession. At exactly 7 p.m., Margaret called the meeting to order with the confidence of someone buying a lottery ticket instead of a one-way pass to federal prison. "Thank you for coming to this critical community safety meeting," she announced, her voice carrying like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Tonight, we address a clear and present danger to our neighborhood." The sound of her heels clicking against the floor was like a countdown timer to her own destruction. Margaret launched into her presentation with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor in a high-stakes trial. She displayed aerial photographs of my property, soil analysis from fraudulent samples, and testimonials from concerned neighbors who had never spoken to me. "The Thompson property represents everything wrong with unregulated development," she declared, pointing at my perfectly normal barn. "Unauthorized structures, environmental contamination, and deliberate disregard for community safety." The taste of anticipation mixed with righteous fury as I watched Margaret dig herself deeper with every PowerPoint slide. Her pièce de résistance came when she called Kevin Morrison as an expert witness. Lonia Development has extensive experience remediating compromised properties, Kevin announced with the confidence of a snake oil salesman. "We're prepared to purchase the Thompson land immediately and begin emergency cleanup at no cost to the community." Agent Rodriguez's pen hit the paper audibly as Kevin confessed to conspiracy in front of 30 witnesses and federal recording equipment. Knowledge nugget. Under Texas Penal Code Section 15.02, conspiracy to commit fraud in a public forum with multiple intended victims constitutes a first-degree felony, punishable by 5 to 99 years in prison. Takeaway: Margaret and Kevin had just escalated from white-collar crime to major felony territory, live, on record. Margaret called for a community vote on emergency action, apparently believing that mob rule could override federal law and private property rights. That's when I stood up. Point of order, President Whitmore. The silence was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming like a mechanical heartbeat. Mr. Thompson, you have no standing in these proceedings. Actually, I have quite a bit of standing, I said, connecting my laptop to the projection system. Especially regarding criminal fraud, evidence tampering, and conspiracy charges. Margaret's face cycled through several colors as my first slide appeared. Criminal evidence presentation, the Margaret Whitmore Fraud Network. What you're witnessing isn't a community safety meeting, I announced to the packed room. It's a criminal conspiracy to steal private property, conducted by officials who have already stolen $2.8 million from previous victims. Shocked gasps filled the room as I displayed financial records showing Margaret's family fraud network. Bank transfers, property deeds, and survey records painted a picture of organized crime that would make the Sopranos blush. The soil samples Margaret presented were planted by her own hands, captured on security cameras with timestamps matching her fraudulent environmental reports. I played the video of Margaret trespassing with sample bags. The room's collective gasp was better than applause. Agent Rodriguez, I believe you've heard enough. Agent Rodriguez stood, her badge gleaming under the clubhouse lights. FBI, Margaret Whitmore, Kevin Morrison, you under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and violation of federal disclosure laws. The click of handcuffs was the sweetest music I'd heard in months. Margaret's final words, captured by Tom's camera, this isn't over. You have no idea what you've done. But I knew exactly what I'd done. I debugged a corrupt system, removed malicious code, and restored proper function to a community that deserved better than criminal leadership. The taste of justice mixed with clubhouse coffee was absolutely perfect. 6 months later, I sit on my front porch, watching the sunrise paint the Texas Hill country gold, sipping coffee that tastes like freedom mixed with vindication. Margaret Whitmore is now residing in a federal facility where her daily schedule is managed by people who don't care about her property compliance opinions. She received 18 months for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and filing false reports, plus 3 years of probation and $2.8 million in restitution to her victims. Kevin Morrison got 2 years for his role in the conspiracy, and his development company dissolved faster than sugar and rainwater. Patricia Vance lost her law license and now works at a call center, learning customer service from the receiving end. But the real victory wasn't Margaret's perp walk on the evening news, though that was admittedly satisfying. The real victory was what happened to our community afterward. The HOA board was completely restructured with new bylaws requiring financial transparency and independent oversight. No more secret deals. No more family contracts. No more boundary adjustments benefiting board members' relatives. The smell of accountability is stronger than morning coffee and infinitely more satisfying. Tom Harrison's HOA Corruption Series won a state journalism award and led to new legislation requiring stricter Homeowners Association oversight across Texas. Our little suburban drama had exposed a statewide problem needing serious attention. The 17 families who'd lost land to Margaret's scheme got their property back, plus compensation. Mrs. Patterson, brave enough to call me about Margaret's door-to-door fraud, used her settlement to start a neighborhood watch program that actually watches out for neighbors instead of harassing them. Agent Rodriguez told me the FBI opened 43 similar investigations based on the patterns we'd uncovered. Margaret hadn't just been running a local scam, she'd been part of a network exploiting homeowners across 3 states. My revenge project had accidentally blown up a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The taste of morning dew mixed with satisfaction has become my favorite flavor. My 47 acres remain mine. My barn stays weathered gray for Instagram tourists. My truck sits in the driveway without anyone questioning its existence. But the best part is what we built from Margaret's criminal empire ashes. The Willow Creek Community Fund, established with recovered fraud money, provides college scholarships for local kids. Last spring, we sent 12 students to university, including Margaret's neighbor's daughter, who dreams of becoming an environmental lawyer. The irony is delicious. Margaret's fraud money now funds future lawyers who protect people from scams like hers. We also upgraded community water infrastructure, the same lines Margaret nearly destroyed with illegal well digging. The new system serves both my ranch and Willow Creek development, proving cooperation works better than theft. Every Thursday, we hold community meetings in the same clubhouse where Margaret tried to steal my property. But now they're actual community meetings, planning block parties, organizing charity drives, and discussing real improvements instead of criminal conspiracies. The sound of neighbors laughing together has replaced Margaret's heel clicks on clubhouse floors. I learned something important. When someone tries to steal your piece of the world, sometimes the best response isn't just defending yourself, it's building something better for everyone around you. Here's my advice for anyone facing their own Margaret Whitmore. Document everything. Research the law. Build alliances with good people. And remember, bullies count on you being too tired or scared to fight back. They never expect you to fight smarter. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments. Some of your stories make Margaret look amateur. And if this helped you understand your rights or gave you courage to stand up to corruption, smash that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the best way to stop the Margarets of this world is ensuring everyone knows how to recognize them, document their crimes, and serve them the justice they've been cooking up for themselves. The taste of justice, it turns out, is even sweeter when shared.